He always thought he was careful. He'd never been caught. So why now? He felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. His gaze darted around the empty server room for any sign of intruders. What was he doing here anyway? Wasn't this place supposed to be abandoned? Shaking off the unnerving incident, he got back to work. He quickly scanned the rows upon rows of equipment, finding nothing out of place. Satisfied, or at least as satisfied as one could be in such a situation, he got to work. Relieved, he went back to erasing the data. But when he looked back at the screen, he noticed something odd. It said, "Transfer failed." He frowned. That wasn't right. He had finished, hadn't he? As he reached for the delete button, a flash of movement outside caught his eye. On the desktop, it showed all the files were there, but when he opened the folder, it was empty. He whirled around to find the source, but saw nothing. After months of planning, I can finally let go, but I hope it all works out. I hope I don't regret this. It says here that he wrote it all down, whatever it is. Okay, but what? Shaken by the feeling and disturbed by the events from earlier, he decided to go home. He checked the door. There was no sign of forced entry. Suddenly, the words on the page caught his eye. Could this be a clue? Was the diary somehow connected to the mysterious happenings? What did it mean? Everything looked normal. He even checked the window, but it was locked from the inside. The room was empty. Whoever had been here was gone. The words were scrawled in a hurried hand. Today is the day. I must act fast. There is no turning back. The clock is ticking. I will not fail. What did it mean? What was she planning? He watched in disbelief as the door slowly creaked open. The diary slipped from his grasp, its pages fluttering to the floor like frightened birds. He spun around to find the source, but saw nothing. Yet he could have sworn he heard a whisper. Delete. "Hello, Thomas." The figure rasped, their voice echoing with a strange hollowness. "We meet at last." In her hand, she clutched a familiar leather-bound book. The diary. All he could do was watch in horror as Eleanor approached. She was so close now, he could feel her icy breath on his skin. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I knew you would come." He could see the wild, unhinged look on her face and a manic grin that stretched across her lips. He stared back in horror, unable to speak. She reached out a skeletal finger and traced a line down his cheek, clenched at her touch, recoiling in disgust. He tried to speak, to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. Fear paralyzed him. Hey! He shook off the unnerving feeling, attributing it to stress and fatigue. Had to focus on a task at hand. As he walked out the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As the world around him faded to black, he saw the final entry in the diary, dated the day he had moved in. It read, "I've waited so long for this moment. Now my revenge will be complete. He will pay for what he did. No one can save him now." He pondered this as he worked tirelessly to transfer data from his hard drive to a cloud server. He knew the risks of storing data locally, but he also knew that a large corporation would be eager to purchase the information he had stolen. The final transfer complete, he leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at his eyelids, but before he could succumb to sleep, he heard it again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. "You shouldn't have come here, Thomas," she repeated, her voice echoing in his mind. "Now you'll never leave." With those chilling words, she plunged the diary into his chest. Panic seized him. Was the diary somehow connected to this? Who had left it here? He needed answers. Once there, he spent hours poring over the entries, searching for clues, anything that could help him understand what was going on. He learned that the diary belonged to a woman named Eleanor Vance, who had lived in the house in the 1920s. Her entries were filled with longing and despair, speaking of a lost love and a deep sadness that consumed her. Confused, he double-clicked on the folder, hoping something would show up. Nothing. It was completely blank. That was when he noticed it, a glint of light coming from under the floorboard in the living room. Did someone live under the floor? He knelt down and pulled the diary out. It was old and worn, its leather cover cracked and peeling. He opened it and started flipping through the brittle pages, finding nothing but indecipherable writing until he came across an entry dated the same day. Below that, in smaller handwriting, was today's date. Startled, he slammed the book shut. How could this be happening? What was going on? He walked over and looked closer. Sure enough, there was a diary wedged under the floorboard. Someone was there, standing at the edge of the roof, looking down at him. He stared back, dumbfounded, while the person made their way closer along the edge of the building. The figure was small, thin, and he couldn't make out any details in the darkness. But he could see the wild look on their face and the manic grin they wore. He was in the middle of transferring data when he heard it, a faint sound at first, then growing louder. What did that mean? Was he in danger? Why was someone watching him? Still, he couldn't bring himself to look away from the screen. So instead, he tried to calm himself down. It was probably nothing, just some crazy homeless person. Maybe they should call the police. No, that would raise too many questions. He didn't want to get involved. Footsteps. He froze, holding his breath as the sound grew nearer. Then it stopped right outside the door. A low voice began speaking, too low for him to hear the words. Then another voice, higher pitched and sharp, responded. They were arguing. He held his breath until the voices faded into the distance, then let out a shaky sigh. It had to be the building's new owner. It wasn't an easy job, and it took him several hours to finish. But finally, just before sunrise, he was done. He transferred the last file and watched as the progress bar crawled toward completion. When the screen flashed transfer complete, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Now, all he had to do was erase the data from his hard drive and he would be done. He turned away from the computer, his back to the open window. He turned back to the computer, his heart pounding, as if sensing his thoughts. The figure suddenly disappeared from view. Curiosity overcame him, and he clicked on the folder to check. Moments later, the hairs on the back of his neck prickled again. When he got home, he poured himself a glass of water and sat down, still shaken from the events. He looked around. Who would leave a diary lying around like this? It read, "Today is the day. I'm so glad I finally have it all written down." He flipped to the next page. It was blank, except for the words, "Today is the day," written in elegant cursive. Then he heard it again, a familiar sound, footsteps in the hallway. Cautiously, he returned to the server room. He figured if anyone had snuck in, they would have left some sort of trace. The diary lay open on the table, the pages rustling softly in the breeze from the air conditioner. He went back home, cradling the diary like a lifeline. But one entry in particular stood out. It was dated June 1928, just 2 days before his own move-in date. Was this diary somehow connected to his strange experiences? Suddenly, he stiffened as the hairs on the back of his neck prickled again. With each passing hour, he felt a sense of urgency, as if he were being watched, which, in a way, he was. He just didn't know it yet. He froze, listening intently. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone walking toward his apartment. A tall, gaunt figure stood framed in the doorway, their eyes gleaming with an eerie light. Eleanor stepped into the room, her gaze fixed on him. Overwhelmed with a sudden surge of panic, he scrambled back, knocking over his chair. Lenore continued advancing, her eyes never leaving his. She was so close now. Thomas found himself rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to speak. "You shouldn't have come here, Thomas," she whispered, her voice a raspy hiss. "This place holds secrets best left undisturbed." Eleanor's grin widened, revealing teeth that were far too sharp, far too long. The diary landed open on the floor, its pages fluttering in the sudden draft created by Eleanor's maniacal laughter.